Now, I was struggling for an idea of what to do for rankings this week, but as you can tell, there's a video here and I was inspired. You may or may not be able to tell, but I got a little sunburned and I thought, what could be better than bringing you a list of rankings of players that will leave you burned in 2023. Now, there is a lot of things kind of going into the idea of being left burnt. One, you do have to factor in the cost you got the player for, as well as the expectation you have in mind for what the player is going to bring you this season in terms of production. So with this list of players I have here for you today, the value just doesn't match up with the production I'm expecting them to bring you to your fantasy rosters. And it's going to leave you feeling burnt for 2023. All fun aside, I do hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. What other players do you feel like the value doesn't meet the realistic expectations for that player? For example, who's overpriced right now? And before we start the video, I want to see if you can guess what players I'm going to be discussing today. I'll even give you a freebie. That player is on the thumbnail. Or is he? But with all of that said and in the books, let's get right to the content you came for. The first player I want to discuss today is the perennial disappointment that is DJ Moore. He's number 7 here because while he's talented and all of these things, and I do think he's going to have a fine season this year, I don't think he costs you too much to have or hold on your roster for what he's going to give you. But I do see some circles believing that this Chicago Bears offense is going to take a massive leap in terms of the throwing offense that they have, and DJ Moore is going to creep somewhat near a wide receiver 1 finish. I just don't see that being the case. I don't think this offense differs that much. I don't think it takes that kind of jump that a Stephon Diggs, that an A.J. Brown level of wide receiver would have in an offense taking a step forward the following season after they're added to the roster. The story just remains the same with DJ Moore, that the production just never meets the expectation. I do think DJ Moore does help out this passing offense a little bit, but I just don't believe he has that same kind of impact that any of those other wide receivers would. He does benefit being the primary receiver in this offense, but it is still set to be a low volume passing offense and a low scoring one at that. Since we are talking about players that are this year focused, if you're trying to win this year, you'll be burned with these players. Looking at a redraft resource, his underdog ADP right now is about right for what I'd say, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 26. This is pretty close to his floor, but does give you some room for upside. However, when you look at his Dynasty ADP, we're currently sitting at wide receiver 23, which I don't hate, but far from love that as well. I don't see him being much more than a decent floor, low ceiling, wide receiver 2 in this offense, which if you're in a deeper league with a lot of starting roster allocations, then yeah, it's not a bad player to have, especially considering the value. But either way, I still want to find ways to improve. He is a pretty interesting value right now. If you wanted to look across positional lines, you could look for somebody like a TJ Hawkinson plus a 24 third. But if you are set at improving at wide receiver, if you're willing to add a second round pick to DJ Moore for 2024, you could look at a Davante Adams, who is a risk, no doubt. But if you want elite wide receiver 1 production that you're maybe hoping for out of DJ Moore, why not tag on that second round pick and get somebody like a Davante Adams that could definitely give you closer to that type of production. And if you're feeling real bold about it, you could move DJ Moore and a first round pick for somebody like Stephon Diggs. Now, this is a very major point where I have to say that I don't hate any of the players on this list. In fact, I think a lot of them are very good players, but that doesn't mean they're going to yield you the fantasy outcome that you want or help your team to the degree that you want them to. A major player filling that role for me right now is Devonta Smith. I think Devonta Smith is an absolutely great player. I think he's a stud of a player, but I do think there's a good chance that we've seen his ceiling, and I don't know how close he's ever going to get to that again. Rather, I don't believe that he can maintain this ceiling, given that he was in a very high-powered offense that is due for some regression, for some lack of efficiency this coming year, and with all of the competition still around him. When it comes to dynasty drafts, he's being drafted as the 12th wide receiver off the board. And when you look at the redraft resource of Underdog Fantasy ADP, he is the wide receiver 13 off the board after being a wide receiver 9 in PPR last year. The wide receiver 9 in PPR last year. I get it. He's young, and we do expect this offense to be good again this year. But if you're rolling into this season expecting wide receiver 1 levels of production from him again this season, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you're rebuilding or you're a team that's not looking to compete yet, I don't really feel the need to move Devonta Smith off my roster. I do think there's a case where he loses some value if he finishes lower than people are hoping for, but I do still believe that he's going to be a nice piece to have on your roster. I might look to pivot to somebody like Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I don't think it's a necessity at this point. But I definitely would if I had the opportunity. But if you are looking to compete this year and you're looking to chase a wide receiver one for 2023, I'm looking at Cooper Kupp. Not only can you get Cooper Kupp with Devonta Smith, I think you can get a 24-second on top of Cooper Kupp after you send Devonta Smith. And if you have to send a third along with Devonta Smith to get Cooper Kupp in the second, more than happy doing so. This brings an accessible elite wide receiver one onto your competitive team, along with a youth element in that second round pick. Seeing that we are getting that much older, we are tearing up at the position as well, but we do still get to add a youth element to the team to kind of not fill the hole for Devonta Smith, but keep our team that much younger. And I believe this upgrade is more than worth it if you're that champion contender. Now, with this next player, I don't really believe that anybody's expecting him to bring their team to a championship, especially not with wide receiver one levels of production. But I do believe that people are still very in and positively believing in Michael Pittman. When it comes to the argument of people not really believing in him helping people out this year, this is evidenced by his wide receiver 34 ADP on Underdog Fantasy. And I'd call this expectation and ADP far more reasonable than his Dynasty ADP of wide receiver 21. Since 2012, 26 rookie quarterbacks have started 10-plus games in a season. Looking at the best wide receiver finishes from those teams with those respective quarterbacks, 1 wide receiver finished in the top 12. 6 finished inside the top 24, and a total of 13 finished inside the top 36, which leaves 13 of those top wide receivers that were linked to those other quarterbacks outside of the top 36. This does not bode well for 2023 with Michael Pittman having a so-called upgrade at quarterback. But the long term looks better, right? So we're just going to overlook the bad year that he's going to have this year, right? The problem is there's 2 things you need to consider here. The first thing is you want points now. Stop waiting on next year. The other is that this is Michael Pittman's contract year. While the Colts are expected to be pretty cash rich next offseason, they are a top 10 team in terms of total cap space expected to have at this point. They could absolutely retain him if they wanted to, but there's no guarantee that with what Michael Pittman has done that they are going to bring him back, which in all honesty could be better for his development and his value. But either way, we are trying to compete. We're trying to avoid players that are going to burn us one way or another in 2023. So let's make the necessary moves to help our team win now. I will say, looking at values from Michael Pittman, the value is in a pretty weird spot in Dynasty. There's no great values that you can pivot to straight up from Michael Pittman, but if you are looking to trade across positional lines, you could look at somebody like Ramondre Stevenson, or if you are focused on getting that wide receiver upgrade, you could pair Michael Pittman with your 24 first to go get someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Chris Olave. I'm more than happy making any of these deals for my competitive roster. If I add Ramondre Stevenson, this might give me an opening to move one of my lesser running backs for a wide receiver replacement that could be a similar finisher to Michael Pittman, or better. Either way, the fact of the matter remains the same, and that's that I do not want to be holding on to Michael Pittman any longer after another what I expect to be disappointing season. There is an argument to be made that this running back has left his dynasty managers burned one way or another every single season of his career so far. But the good news is people are still a glutton for punishment when it comes to DeAndre Swift. Now he joins a crowded filling backfield that is seemingly willing to continue their use of the hot hand approach. On top of that singular point, Swift's calling card has been that he is an above average receiving back. Now to pile on top of that point, the Eagles do not throw the ball to the running back position since the addition of A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts' emergence in this offense. There were a total of 72 targets to running backs last year and a total of 46 receptions to running backs last year. Now, this was down a good margin from the 2021 totals. However, you have to keep in mind that this was a much higher volume passing offense in general, and the running back targets and receptions both went down. In my opinion, it's very unlikely that at this point, DeAndre Swift will get a reliable, consistent, and worthwhile role in this offense. So I'm going to look for a situation I feel much more confident in. As an example, I'm looking to move DeAndre Swift for Dameon Pierce straight up if I have to. But given the name value of Swift, I believe you could move Swift and a third for Dameon Pierce and a second-round pick. At least that would be my opening offer. As I've said before, you never want to send a straight-up trade at the same position one for one. The reason for this being is if I were to go to that manager and say, hey, take my DeAndre Swift for your Dameon Pierce, all that trade is saying is that I would rather have Dameon Pierce than DeAndre Swift, which, hey, is true. But I need to position myself in a way that seems like I'm giving up value and getting value in return for giving up the higher valued asset. I just don't trust trust DeAndre Swift, and I especially don't trust his role in this offense that is crowded. They did not have to pay much to go and get this guy. There is not much invested. He is in a contract year, which doesn't mean anything for the Eagles. I don't believe they're set to pay any running backs anytime soon. I think they will continue to look to ball on a budget at this position. And I think DeAndre Swift is in no different scenario next offseason with another crowded running back class in free agency and in the draft. I think there's a good chance DeAndre Swift struggles this season and struggles in the future. And I just don't want anything to do with dealing with his value anymore. Get your sunblock and stop being burned by DeAndre Swift. This is another guy whose value I've been pretty out on this entire offseason, and I'm going to continue to be out on because I do not believe that people are valuing or taking into account the injury concerns that lie with Javonte Williams. I just can't stress enough how much this ACL injury will impact this coming season. We've seen it time and time again that the season post ACL tear is not good. Why are we choosing to just assume that Javonte is going to be the answer and be the guy that beats history? Javonte Williams will not be the exception to the rule. All he will do is burn a roster spot on your roster for the 2023 season. In Dynasty, he is currently being drafted as the running back 17. When you look at our redraft resource of Underdog Fantasy, he's being drafted as the running back 29. That's 12 spots of difference. This leads me to believe that most are expecting Javonte to have a down year, which will further hurt his Dynasty value. And I'll be honest, running back 29 is not even a spot where I'm comfortable drafting Javonte on Underdog Fantasy at this point. But with reports coming out that he's expected to be ready for week 1, I'm now in full sell and trade send offer mode. In my opinion, as long as these reports stay positive, I'm going to be that much more likely to sell and get out on Javonte Williams and get good value return as the season approaches. I don't care how much positive hype news comes out for Javonte Williams. I'm not buying it. For a couple of trades looking to move Javonte Williams, I'm looking to utilize Javonte Williams and a 24 third to tier up to Ramondre Stevenson. I'd even be willing to pair Javonte Williams and a 24 second to go get Najee Harris and hopefully get a third round pick back. Another consideration with Javonte Williams is the fact that he enters a contract year in 2024. With how the running back landscape is working with contracts and the NFL draft lately with so much talent being on the market, I don't want to be dealing with another murky running back contract situation since he's had such a tumultuous start to his career. Save yourself the headache, get out on Javonte Williams while the value is still good. If you're trying to be a competitive team, if you're looking towards 2024, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. If you know this channel at all, you guessed in the comments that this player would be on this list. You knew he was going to be here. Simply put, again, as always, I don't hate the player. None of us hate the player. I just don't believe that Drake London's value is justified given what I believe his production will be. Currently being drafted as the wide receiver 11 in Dynasty, but the wide receiver 22 price tag on Underdog ADP. This is another gap that I believe indicates what the redraft community thinks of and projects London to be this year. And I tend to agree. I think that's a pretty nice spot for him actually, to where you actually get some ceiling baked into that draft spot. I think he very well could be around that wide receiver 16 price range. I definitely see London improving this year, or at least I like to think he does, because I think he is a talented player. But a lot of people are trying to peg Drake London for wide receiver 1 production. And you know as well as I do that if he does not hit that mark, his value will drop and people will start questioning him. And hey, he might even become a value someday. I just don't think that point is today. Now, I don't think this offense is a very pass-friendly one, nor do I believe it to be a high-scoring one. And ultimately, I think this offense runs through Bijan Robinson. The problem here lies in the quarterback situation yet again, and possibly even in the offense itself and its philosophy. Do I think an actual quarterback upgrade is coming at some point? Sure. But I don't believe that to be Desmond Ridder, who, when you look back to last year, in some metrics was worse than Marcus Mariota. I understand that he was a rookie and you have to build in some development into those questions, as Marcus Mariota probably is what he is at this point. You would expect Ridder to get a little better, but I don't believe that Desmond Ridder is any type of world beater or anything like that. I don't think he's the next guy in this offense long term, at least. I do think he's the next guy for now. But until this quarterback upgrade comes, I don't think you can rely too heavily on Drake London. And I think this offense, as I mentioned, purely runs through Bijan Robinson. When it comes to fantasy too, if you are not looking to compete, or you're in a rebuild, or you're drafting a year 1 punt, whatever the case is, I'm fine with holding London. I think there's some values out there where you could get something better than Drake London, but I'm not dying to go make those moves. I'm not, gonna make a big deal about saying sell London, he's gonna be trash forever or anything like that. I don't believe that. But if you are trying to compete, why not chase someone like Stephon Diggs, Jahmyr Gibbs, or Mark Andrews? These are set to be elite players at their positions for this season. And if you're trying to chase a championship, these players will do far much more for you. And if you're willing to add a first round pick to Drake London, you can get into the conversation of guys like CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and even the aforementioned Bijan Robinson. I understand the hype for Drake London and why people like him. I understand he's a talented player and all of these things. But why wouldn't you decide to make the move to a better situation if you can to help your team win now? For this next conversation, you can copy and paste a large part of the conversation we had with Javonte Williams here when it comes to expectations for running backs returning from an ACL injury. But Breece Hall is still far more highly valued in Dynasty, seeing that he's being drafted as the running back 4 in Dynasty startups, while an underdog, he's being drafted as the running back 11. Long term, I'm still pretty in on Breece Hall. Love the talent, and I don't believe his ACL tear will have any long-term complications. However, since we're talking about getting burnt this season, I do have my concerns. If you are expecting Breece Hall to perform as a running back 1 this season on the year, I think you are really setting yourself up for some serious disappointment. No running back has returned the following year following an ACL tear and performed better than their previous season outside of Adrian Peterson and Jamal Charles. Plenty of running backs have gone on to have great careers beyond that following season, but almost none bounce back the very next season. It's just an unrealistic expectation at this point, given the history of the injury. Stop banking on running backs to be the next one to do it. Part of the reason why Breece Hall is the number 1 player on this list is because he is such a high value in Dynasty right now. He's still being valued very respectably. Redraft drafts as well. The cost of getting this player, drafting this player, or having them burn a hole in your roster if you're trying to compete this year is far too high to not do anything about. If you want a running back 1 who's more reliable for the cost and you're looking to win this season, take a look at somebody like Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley. Obviously, it depends on the team that has these running backs, what they're looking to do, what their outlook on Breece Hall is. Maybe that injury is kind of scaring them away. And if you're looking to cross positional lines from somebody like Breece Hall or a running back, to go get a Chris Olave or a Deshaun Watson. At the end of the day, like I've said with this entire list, I don't hate any of these players. They're all very good NFL players, and they all have very good outlooks for the long term, for the most part. But what I do hate is standing idly by while players like this burn holes in your lineup. Why sit on the value when you can manipulate the market and navigate yourself to a better situation? I know the answer. It's because almost all of these players that we're pivoting to are older options. In Dynasty, we want to stick to the younger up-and-comers. I get it. We want to be the first guys in on these players for some nostalgic reason. But I encourage you, if you want to win, learn to see a bad situation for what it is and manipulate the market to find yourself in a better one. There's zero reason to stay in on a player through thick and thin. Just because you drafted somebody, don't make it personal. Situations change, some situations don't. Make the most of the assets you have, even if it means trading them. They don't all have to stay on your roster forever. While that is it for the video today, I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. What players are you looking to avoid this season and avoid getting burnt on this season? And if you guess which players were going to be discussed, drop those in the comments as well. You probably heard me mention it a couple times talking about Underdog Fantasy. In case you didn't know, Underdog Fantasy is the best ball platform out there and drafting platform you could possibly have. It's best ball, so it's all the fun of drafting without any of the commitment of starting another Dynasty startup. Be sure to scratch that drafting itch by going into Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code REWIND for a 100% deposit match on your first deposit up to $100. Your first draft is on us. Heck, maybe a lot of your first drafts. You can find that link in the YouTube description box or on the pinned comment below. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you check out the other video on your screen right now. Dive into all the Dynasty strategy goodness that we have for you in that playlist. But hey, with all that said, that is going to be it for me today. I will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.